I'm Michael Bergöö from Biovision Foundation, based in Switzerland. I have a Swedish last name, but my Swedish is not so fluent yet. I'm a Swiss originally, and I have just recently moved to Stockholm and support my organization from here. And Andrea mentioned, okay, what if we create a sustainable future, but we cannot contain climate change? And I think one big lever that we have is, or that we actually need to activate, is to transform our food system. That's what I'm going to talk about today, and that's actually what my organization does mainly. Let's see how many insect nerds we have here. Who knows what that is? Okay.
Caterpillar?
Good guess.
Larva?
Yeah. Well, it's the cassava mealybug, which was a big issue in the 80s, mainly in Africa. It was imported from South America. It by ship probably. It came to Africa and it was threatening the cassava plant, which is the staple food of 200 million people. And since it was imported, so it's a predator, it did not have any natural enemy. And it created quite devastating results. The cassava plants were destroyed and a lot of people went hungry. So the founder of Biovision, Hans Herren, who is an entomologist, so an insect researcher, said, okay, well, we can either throw pesticides at it and see what happens, or we look for the natural predator, so we do biological pest control. And he and his team found this wasp in Paraguay. I think they really traveled several months from north to south, east to west, to finally find this natural predator of the cassava mealybug. And took it, put it in quarantine, did some tests that no destructive side effects would happen, and spread it all over the infested areas. And within a few years, the cassava production was stabilized again. For this, he received the World Food Prize in 1995. One of the persons that couldn't congratulate him was also the US president at the time. And with the prize money, we could found Biovision, which was then officially launched in 1998. Our mission, our vision is a world with enough food for all, produced with healthy people in a healthy environment. How do we do that? We are 39 people based mainly in Switzerland, in Zurich, in Geneva, well, one person now in Stockholm, and 300 colleagues in Sub-Saharan Africa. So our focus area, main area of activity is Sub-Saharan Africa. We have 29 projects in Eastern Africa and also slowly now expanding to Southern and Western Africa. But we also work in the global policy space, and we also work in Switzerland. So what do we do? Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot. Yeah, we have about 9 million Swiss francs of revenue, so 90 million Swedish crowns. So we're a mid-sized NGO. Zero hunger is really at the core of our operations, so really creating a world where nobody has to go to bed hungry. But as you can see, or as you know from the SDGs, they're very much connected to other areas. So we also work on responsible consumption and production. We also work on the health of people, because food means a healthy life. Obviously poverty reduction. A lot of people do not have enough to eat, so they and cannot afford to eat. So if they produce themselves, they're better off, or also on the biodiversity and the preservation of ecosystems. So we try to pursue a systemic approach. Now come the bad news, right? What food system would you like to have? This one that already today creates the double amount of calories that we actually need. Some calculations show that we produce more than 4,000 calories per person already today, but still more than 800 million people go to bed hungry every life. Agriculture produces about a third of the climate greenhouse gas emissions, and so on and so forth. Biodiversity loss, food waste and loss. Yeah, you have many issues, but I don't want to talk about only problems today, because I want to actually show what we can do to turn this ship around and create a more sustainable food system. So, yeah, the question is obviously, or would you like to have a food system like this? So one important approach or methodology or scientific concept is agroecology. Who has heard about agroecology? Okay, not so many. So I'll just explain very briefly. In 2008, there was the International Assessment on Agricultural Science, Technology and Development. A little bit a long name, but it's basically the World Agriculture Report. It was an assessment of 400 scientists, which showed that if we turn to agroecological practices, we can turn around or change the course in our food system. Agroecology is a little bit, actually, well, I think Andrea already gave a good explanation. Regenerative agriculture, agroecology, they are connected, the concepts, but basically it's working with the ecological processes and apply them to agricultural systems. That means that we use less or no chemical inputs. We do intercropping instead of monocropping. We close the nutrient cycle, so but also we create more food sovereignty so that people can feed themselves. We do not only produce export crops, etc. So it's a whole concept and a little bit a complicated concept because it's very knowledge intensive. Doing a hectare of just one crop is easier than actually trying to start use different plants that actually protect each other, etc. But I'll come back to that, give you a concrete example how it can work. So after that report, UNCTAD has produced a report, and UNEP has produced a report, and the FAO has produced a report, and the EAT, Lancet Committee, everybody has produced a report, and this Committee on World Food Security. And actually right now as we're talking, the scientists are presenting a report at the UN General Assembly on how we can transition to sustainable development, and agroecology again is mentioned very prominently, but why is it still a niche? And that's where Biovision comes in. So let's talk first about the concrete things, the concrete projects we do in the field. One is the push-pull methodology. It was developed at an international research center in Nairobi, and it works like that farmers, in this case sorghum, but it can also be applied to maize, they do intercropping. Let me see if need those. Do I have a, no. Okay, I thought I had like a little beamer or so, or a spot. Well, they do. They plant desmodium, which is a weed that pushes away the stem borer. So that's those insects here. Push them out of the field, and outside of the field, the farmers plant brachiaria grass or napier grass that attract them. And actually, this grass, you know it, maybe those big grass. When you go over with your fingers, you get stuck. So actually, those insects get stuck there, and the plants, the crop is protected. But it also has two more side benefits. Desmodium fixes nitrogen, because very often you have a nitrogen overflow, so it fixes nitrogen in the soil. And also the brachiaria grass or the napier grass can be used as fodder for the livestock, which is a very nutritious fodder for the livestock. And this is no chemical inputs, no nothing. But of course it takes a little bit of knowledge how to do it. And we have done studies, long-term comparison studies between push-pull and conventional systems in the tropics, and they show that actually on the output, on the yield, they are comparable, but the farmers, the smallholder farmers in Africa, they are better off financially with this system because they don't have to pay for the expensive chemical fertilizers or pesticides. So that's, yeah, we obviously hope that everything will be better with this, but I think to have a little bit more money in the pocket at the end of the year, I think is a good argument for that. And we work in several countries, and all these countries that you've seen that we're expanding: Rwanda, Malawi, Zambia, but also Burkina Faso. That's the push-pull technology that we are, together with an impact investor, we are outscaling. And maybe just very recently, sorry, I'm not an entomologist myself. I'm not an insect nerd, but this is the fall armyworm, which is actually a new a new pest, again imported, and it's really affecting the crops in Africa, but nowadays also in Southeast Asia. And the first research or first practical evidence has shown actually that the push-pull fields were less affected by this predator than conventional fields that did not have this intercropping. And now we're trying to find out what it really is that keeps that bug away from the fields. Another important part of our work is the information dissemination. For many years we've been editing and publishing The Organic Farmer, which is a newspaper that reaches several 100,000 readers, also a radio program, a website, and it also exists in Swahili. So this is in Kenya a lot of people speak and understand or can read English, but for example in Tanzania it's in Swahili. So that's another important activity. And also, for example, we support training center for ecological farming, where several thousand farmers are trained each year. And then again, they pass on their knowledge. As you know, especially in Africa, a lot of knowledge is not passed on through writing, but actually through oral transmission. Okay, but as we've seen from all these reports, people still don't, or decision makers still don't really act upon the evidence. So in 2011, Biovision decided to open its international advocacy program to support policy changes as well. And of course, very fast it became clear that the SDGs is a very, very important process where a new framework will be developed that acts as a reference for policymakers in all the countries of the world. And this is a little bit where I have my heart mostly. I've lived in Africa before, but I've for about 2.5 years I was sitting in this conference room, no daylight, many hours sitting there or drinking coffee with delegates and negotiators from different countries to actually craft the SDGs. And in that picture was taken, well, I was somewhere in the back. I wasn't as prominent here in the front, obviously. But that's on 2nd of August, where the SDGs were finally agreed among the negotiators. And then, of course, a month later, in September 2015, they were then adopted by the heads of state. And Biovision was, in a way, lucky that we were lucky in two ways. Lucky in one way that we found the funding to be part of such a process, because it takes a lot of time, resource, commitment to travel to New York to prepare all the inputs, to translate the evidence from all these reports into one-pagers for policymakers. Simplification sometimes is necessary. And also we were a little bit lucky that we were the only ones, or one of the only NGOs, and unfortunately, or especially no big NGO decided to specifically work on SDG 2. So we had a lot of space to move around and shape this SDG the way we wanted. Of course, in the end, it's the governments that decided, and there are still some aspects in there that we would have liked to have it differently. And agroecology was not en vogue yet in 2015. It was a strong resistance, but nevertheless, we're pretty happy how it came along. Especially when you're in this room, you hear the different positions, and then you become also a little bit realistic after a while. But that was in 2015, and now we continue our engagement for more. We also now, many of these reports also stated that there's not enough investments in research for agroecology. Most research goes to the 9 major crops: potato, rice, sugar, cassava, wheat, etc., soya. And so now we have a new program where we support or where we look for more or try to convince policymakers or the people sitting at the financial flows to actually push a little bit more money into a research that supports this agroecological transition. And of course, we also look at best practices from other continents. For example, maybe you have heard of the zero-budget natural farming in India, where a whole state with 6 million farmers is trying to actually go into regenerative agriculture. And of course, those are actually those beacons of hope or use cases that we need to take and present to decision makers, for example, in Africa or in Europe. Say, hey, look, a small county in India that's the size of Sweden and the population of Sweden is doing it. So why? Well, and they might have a little bit less financial resources. So if it works, we don't know. But politics takes time. And of course, we've also worked directly with the governments in Africa, here in Senegal, to support them with the SDG implementation. Which is important because what do you do now with these 17 goals? I mean, decision making count to 3, so we support here as well. And then the last part, and I think that is a very important one. We also need to remain credible. We also need to take responsibility at home. So we also work in Switzerland, for example, with consumer sensitization, where in this case it's a little mock supermarket. You are like a small ICA store or Hemshop. You walk in, you put your groceries in the basket, but instead of paying at the cashier, you get let's say you get an evaluation how sustainable your shopping basket is on different criteria, and you can test yourself. And obviously it's not always obvious. Should you buy now the tomatoes from Sweden or the ones from Spain? What do you think? I mean, let's say biological tomatoes from Sweden or conventional tomatoes from biological tomatoes from Spain or conventional tomatoes from Sweden. What is more sustainable?
Spain.
Depends on the season.
Exactly. Yeah. So in most cases, probably it is Spain. But if, for example, if they're produced in the winter in greenhouses, then it's that's definitely the ones from Spain. In the summer, obviously, when you grow them here, it's the ones from Sweden. Or we also mobilized researchers and universities for the SDSN. For the Sustainable Development Solutions Network in Switzerland, which I helped to set up. So that was a little bit my job before I came here to Switzerland. Again, a little bit on the policy side. Okay, now what are our challenges? And I'm talking challenges as an organization. All right, now this is a little bit cut off. So I start again. So this, I'll put it together to a puzzle. So we're working mainly with small-scale producers, small-scale food producers. That's what this red field should say. And obviously they are very often in very remote areas. They're self-sufficient. So they are hard to reach, and of course it's very hard to make a business case out of that. So basically they're dependent on organizations like Biovision or other donors, and that's I lived a year in Liberia. I think from a sustainability point of view it's a challenge, because once Biovision leaves or another organization leaves, they're left alone, and it's very hard to push them above a threshold that they start to thrive. A lot of people, I mean, the World Bank defines poverty at $1.75 a day. If you push these farmers, for example, to $2, they're not poor anymore by World Bank standards, but they are very vulnerable to fall back. So that's one challenge we have: how to sustainably improve their lives. Then, okay, this should say research to practice. As we work a lot closely with research centers, but also with small-scale producers, with practitioners, there's obviously a gap in communication, but also the research for agroecology is very complicated, because it's multidisciplinary. You have to understand the ecosystem services, land degradation, erosion, but also social aspects of farming and so on. And as I said before, most of the research money nowadays goes into let's say in the traditional R&D, into the basic research and not the applied research. So that's another challenge we're finding to bring, let's say, those innovations or methodologies from the research lab to the field and back and find the funding for it, but also the interest from policymakers, because it's not straightforward. It's well, you all know, innovation is a twisted way, and then of course to induce policy changes. Once we have the evidence, here is, let's say, that comes to the evidence. One track goes into, well, we need to induce the policy changes. For example, in many countries in Africa, still government gives out subsidies for chemical fertilizers, and well, I think it's in two ways very difficult. First, it's the wrong subsidies for the wrong thing, and the second is you always have a strong lobby that will defend this subsidy if you take it away. So that's, for example, a very important challenge we have. And then the last one is the knowledge dissemination and scaling. We are currently, with the push-pull methodology, we have about almost nearly 300,000 farmers that apply it. When you look at the number of farmers in Africa, that's a drop in the ocean. So how do we scale it up, and how do we scale it up, let's say, in an approach that is not per se a business model, or we haven't, or let's say that takes so much more to make it a business model. All we do here is very early stage, let's say, support. And for example, the best success story we've had so far is in ecological bee farming or beekeeping in Ethiopia, where MasterCard Foundation came in to scale it up all over Ethiopia. But that's still, it's a foundation, it's philanthropic money, it's that's a challenge. What are our learnings? Also have 4 learnings. Well, I think to tackle a lot of these problems, you have to work in partnerships. So the SDG 17 somehow brings us all together. We are not very good in working with the private sector yet. That's actually what I'm doing right now here in Stockholm, trying to develop a strategy how we can engage more with the private sector. We're good in working with research, and I think that is not bad either. But of course, we also we need to really work in partnerships, and I think that's something we have embraced, and that's something we have learned along the way. Whether you work in the field, whether you work in the UN catacombs or elsewhere. As I said, we're a mid-sized organization, and I think one of the big challenges or also learning is that we try to remain lean and innovative. So let's say of course we like to grow, we like to make a bigger movement out of it, but being that size we are today is also an advantage, because we can move much faster into niches that there are. So that's the other learning. And for example, the advocacy in New York was one of those niches that we could occupy, and I didn't have to make long phone calls with my colleagues in the headquarters, like, what is our position, what shall I say? No, I could make it on the spot, basically. And as long as I follow the vision of Biovision. And I also mentioned it already before, obviously, that we remain credible and take responsibility at home and in the Western world. So that's why we opened in 2017 the program in Switzerland, so that we also induce policy changes in Switzerland, and especially also tackle our consumption patterns, which have a huge influence on actually how we produce the food in sub-Saharan Africa, or also now obviously for very recently in the Amazon, which has something to do how we consume in Switzerland or Sweden or elsewhere. So this is a little bit where we are as an organization, and I would like to take you back once more to the insects and give you a short let's say sample of our latest project in Switzerland, which is called Sounding Soil, because I talked about insects. They have a very important role in agriculture, and we're standing on soil every day. They produce 90% of our food. And what do you think, how many, if you take a handful of soil, how many species are in this one?
More than humans on the earth.
Thousands.
Yeah. Oh,
10 billion.
yeah, close. 2.5 billion. So yeah,
Species.
2.5 billion species.
Wow.
in a handful of
Healthy soil.
healthy soil. Yeah, exactly. And now and that's a good word, because now with this sounding soil project, actually we work together with the sound designers and scientists, and it's a project where you can actually listen to your soil as a farmer or a gardener or whatever, and you hear a difference whether the soil is healthy or not so healthy, or at least diverse or not. And first I take you on a field somewhere in the flatlands of Switzerland. It's sugar beet. And what you hear, that's the wind. You can meditate. Okay, not much happening. All right. Now I take you to a field in the alpine zone. What you hear here is not the researcher falling over his device. It is actually different insects.
Sounds like traffic jam.
Definitely traffic jam, yeah. So they're communicating, and obviously different insects make different noises. And now that's actually the job of the researchers to find out which insect makes which noise, so that we can combine this let's say design, let's say sound design with hard traditional research, and improve our soils in Switzerland and elsewhere. And with that, I thank you very much for your attention.